Rural Roads University, and welcome to our webinar series on sport, leadership, and social change. Great to see some familiar names in the participant list, and welcome. Should have a great morning. We always start by acknowledging the land that Rural Roads resides on, and we like to thank the Lekwungen and Kusepsin people, also known as Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations communities, for allowing us to live, learn, work, teach, and play on their lands. We also give thanks to the ancestors, supernatural ones, creatures, big and small, hereditary leaders and matriarchs, for looking after those rich resources and the cultural teachings of this beautiful land. This is the path that I walk down in my neighborhood because, of course, we're all operating out of our homes right now. This is Mystic Vale. It also is on the lands of the Lekwungen and Kusepsin people. And as I stroll down here with my dogs, I often reflect on the learnings that this forest offers me every day. There are owls in here often, which I love the most. And this was the home many centuries ago of villages of First Nations peoples who lived on Cadborough Bay, on the Harrow Strait, and where it meets the Sailor Sea. Gorgeous place and lots to teach us. Much like Rural Roads, we also reside on old growth forest and a beautiful bay, the Esquimalt Lagoon. We're right on the ocean. We can see the Olympic Mountains off in the distance. And we often can look out the windows of our classrooms or offices and be reminded constantly of the systems and interconnectedness of the ecological model that surrounds us. So we rely on it hugely at Rural Roads. This is actually the path I take to get to my office on campus. And so it's very similar, and I can, it's funny, the parallels in your lives, right? So that you are drawn to certain concepts. And I think that's what drew me to sport as well, are the interconnections, the collaborations, and the beauty that's all around me. My sport is rowing, and I live in Victoria, BC, probably because of that. It's one of the places where you can row all year long in Canada. I'm a professor here at Rural Roads, and I, on purpose, put this castle. It's one of the main artifacts of our campus, but it also is probably one of the strongest artifacts of colonialism that you'll see on the island. Really, it was built by the Dunsmuirs. They traipsed in and took over the land and built this giant castle and estate, and it's beautiful, and beautiful gardens. I literally have to smell the roses every time I go to a meeting. But it also signifies for us and is a very strong reminder of the cultural factors and artifacts that we really have to challenge on a daily basis. And I love that the theme of International Women's Day today is to choose to challenge. It's crucial if we're going to see positive social change that we challenge those beliefs and values and underlying assumptions that are so deeply embedded in our culture, if we're going to see those kinds of open-armed changes that we are all craving. We really pride ourselves at Rural Roads for our applied, community-based, and transformational learning, research, and teaching model. We believe in social change through interdisciplinary approaches, and our programs are structured and designed in that way to be very interconnected. I've come full circle from sport and through all sorts of different paths of research back to human social development in and through sport, and therefore very interested in this webinar series and in inviting a number of fantastic guests to these different episodes to discuss important topics that intersect with sport. This is a bridge on our campus as well, and it's the metaphor for my School of Communication and Culture. We love the bridge because it signifies for us that you have to mind the gap before you can bridge it. Before you can extend your hand or build some sort of communication channel or bridge of any kind, you need to understand diversity, the differences between the two individuals or institutions or nations. Crucial to remember. We also pride ourselves on our ability to welcome working professionals, people who are trying to balance work and life and learning. And we acknowledge the learning that they bring from their different contexts. We also partner with Game Plan, and we're looking at partnering with CFL actually as well and other NSOs to invite athletes into our programs, but mostly we want to acknowledge the learning they bring as well. So in the same way we acknowledge professional experience, we acknowledge the learning that you gain on the sports field or court or arena or ice. Our programs reflect many of the issues that sport is concerned with as well. We have programs focused on development, diversity, inclusion, education, environment, equity and human rights, health, media and communication, and peace. And of course, you can see so many sport bodies that are concerned with those same issues and challenges. These are my 3 kids. I like to just get them into my PowerPoints whenever I can because I like to remember that I have them. They're all busy doing their things now, but here they are, loving sport, playing sport all their lives. And I'm so grateful for the experiences and challenges that they've faced through sport. There's so much you can learn through sport, and that's the point of this webinar series. Today, we're going to focus on gender equity in and through sport. Because in sport, we have challenges and barriers facing women, but also through sport, we can try to advance women and gender equity. And equity of all kinds, of course, but today we're going to focus on gender. I've been reflecting lately as a researcher on Joyce Fletcher's work, where she explores the post-heroism or post-heroic leadership, a call for a different kind of leadership that doesn't rely on authoritarian or hierarchical or hegemonic models, but instead looks more toward a partnership model, much like Ryan Esler talks about. She states that to truly capture the transformational promise of this kind of partnership model or post-heroic leadership, we have to acknowledge, recognize, name the radical nature of its challenge and the gender and power dynamics inherent in it. If we're going to move from a power over structure to a power to, with or within, we need to stop having a person driving the change and instead focus on shared purpose. What will that take? Well, it takes a lot of questioning of assumptions, and that's what we're here to do today. I've had some guests join me over the past couple of weeks, and we have interviews with Alison Sandmeyer-Graves, CEO of Canadian Women in Sport, and they're uploaded on our website, and also Pamphilette Bouissa. She's with the Canadian Rugby Sevens team. She's an activist and speaker, and we had a good hour-long interview together. I'll also be speaking with Isabelle Caillé. She works with the Canadian Coaching Association of Canada, a senior coaching consultant and director of sport safety, but also responsible for some women in coaching programs to advance women in sport. We have Kate Burness, who joined me a couple of months ago, and also a great interview with Sheila Robertson. I was so grateful to capture her words and historical knowledge. And of course, we had a visit from Nancy Hogshead-Makar from the US, who's an incredible activist for safe sport and women in sport. Today, we have Tricia Smith, president of COC, and a former crewmate. I have to just put a plug in there. And I love this picture of Tricia, so I try to use it more than her the typical ones we're seeing in the newspaper all the time. And here's Gabby Estrada. She's the program director for Fast and Female, a fantastic organization that we'll hear more about today. Kate Haber is she was a Rowing Canada athlete for many, many years, and she'll be, I hope, sharing a little bit about her experience as part of the Mommy Double. And I think she even has her baby with her today, so she may be able to share a little glimpse of her. And we also have Jenny Lim. Jenny joins us from the organization Canadian Women in Sport, where she's a program manager. And we have Lorraine Lafreniere, who's coming to us, as the CEO of Coaching Association Canada, and who, in partnership with other organizations, has been so responsible for so many changes and programs to advance women in sport. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I also wanted to highlight that we have a couple of other episodes coming up, one focusing on human rights through sport and one on diversity and inclusion in and through sport in May. And so I will stop sharing and let's get to the panel and get chatting about women in sport. And so I always like to start first in the realm of sport, and I'll just go around the table if you don't mind. But from here on in, when I ask a question, instead of it being kind of and lockstep, what I'll do is ask a question, and when you're ready to chime in, just turn your mic on and I'll see that, and I'll be able to, smoothly welcome you in to answer those questions. I'll keep my eye on that, okay? But the first question is really, what has sport meant to you? What kind of role has sport played for you as a woman, as a young girl perhaps, and now? What role does sport really play for you and what meaning has it held for you? And then can I start with, how about I start with Lorraine? What do you think, Lorraine?
There you go. I'm so happy you mentioned Isabel, Jen. She's such a leader, so I'm thrilled that you're interviewing her as well. You know, I was never a high performance athlete, and I always come at it from the perspective of sport for all. And so that's kind of guided a bit of different conversation for me with everyone. But I have always had physical fitness, except for the typical female teenage years in my instances where I left and then came back, understanding the benefit. But what I'll just share very quickly is I'm a cancer survivor. I had stage 3 breast cancer 7 years ago. And here's the deal. Sport got me through that, not during, but actually before, because what I came to understand about sport is that it really trains you to build the muscle of dealing with the unanticipated. That's what sport's about. You cannot control the variables. You can only control yourself. And I chalk up the way I went through that experience to my life in sport.
Thank you. And you make such a great point, Lorraine, about everyone can participate in sport as well, right? I often say you can even participate if you hate sport, because in hating it, you're participating, holding a strong opinion. Thank you. And Kate, how about you? What has it meant for you?
So I've mostly have participated in sport for most of my life, but I didn't come to high performance sport until most of my teammates would be retiring from high performance sport. So I spent most of my life dabbling in as many different sports as possible. And it's because I just love moving and the challenge of trying to go faster or stronger, or shoot more baskets. Or when I was 16, I tried figure skating for the first time. I was really, really terrible. I competed against girls who were up to my belly button, but I still did it for 3 years because I loved it. And so it's kind of always this challenge. And I realized that you can learn so much through movement, and all those learnings, whether it's resilience, how to cooperate with others, how to push yourself and just keep going. If you fail, you just get up and keep going and trying. These are all learnings that are so valuable for every other facet of your life. And you can learn that in Pee-wee soccer, or you can learn it while you're training for the Olympics. And that's why I think sport is so special.
Thank you so much. The learning, and we'll talk lots more about that, you know, what particularly we can peel or distill from sport to help us, especially facing this challenge. Wonderful, thank you. And Gabby.
Firstly, thank you for having me. Really excited to be amongst such an incredible group of women from across Canada and not in Canada, which I think is so amazing, and the power of the virtual sphere as we navigate COVID. You know, it's interesting because when I first was looking at these questions, I was thinking to myself, I think it's also important to acknowledge how the sports system and culture, unfortunately, has failed a lot of groups and is not always as welcoming as many believe it to be. And there's been moments where sport has definitely failed me. And I think especially when we look at girls and women and others from equity deserving groups, that, you know, a system that was built by boys and men for boys and men oftentimes has really left out girls and women that are representative of other intersecting social identities. But I also came out from a very privileged perspective and still being able to have access to sport in some way, shape, or form. And my parents are from Guatemala, and my sport experience is very different than my brother's. But sport really has had a huge impact on me. It's the reason I'm in the career that I'm in. And like Lorraine, I was not a high performance athlete, and you know, really still enjoyed sport and found the passion and happiness that sport gave me on a recreational basis, and was fortunate to go to a university that offered intramurals. But that really led me down the path of sport. And similar to Lorraine and Kate, like I left sport at some point, came back, used it to really build up my courage. And, you know, it's something that we see a lot with Fast and Female too, is that there are a lot of entry and exit points for sport and in the sport system for girls and women. But if we can find a way to create great quality, accessible, inclusive sport opportunities, then you're going to create more byproducts of a good sport culture. And I'm really fortunate to have been able to see that and be a part of it.
Thanks so much, Gabby. And yeah, you raise the challenge in sport as well, right? It's not always so rewarding or positive. It can be really hurtful, painful. And that's what we'll talk about today as well, on where are the opportunities within, but also even through that experience in sport that we can learn and change and advance equity. Thank you. And Jenny from New Zealand, all the way from New Zealand. I love it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, calling in morning time over here. And again, just like what everyone has shared, such a privilege to be among such amazing company on International Women's Day. So New Zealand is home. It's always this tricky question of where are you from? I'm an Asian looking person with a New Zealand accent, but I live in Canada. So it's always a bit of a longer explanation. But I grew up in a small village in Malaysia called Lahadatu, where there isn't much else to do but to play sport. So that is all we did, just with the other kids in the village, playing badminton across the fence or making up new games and sports using coconut leaves that have fallen from the tree. And so like many others, I wasn't also a high performance athlete, but I grew up playing a lot of sport. And aside from that, almost all of my jobs have also been in sport. And especially being an Asian woman in whether it be the Canadian or the New Zealand sports system, the sports environment has in many ways magnified my sense of being different or not being one of them, and having many assumptions made about my ability to either perform or to lead or to represent purely because of the way I look. But it's also through sport that I've learned to be proud of my identity, to be proud of why I'm different. Just like what Gabby shared, you know, there's a lot of pain that can come from it, but also a lot of growth that can come from that. So, and since then I've been lucky to be given many opportunities to speak about my experience, and also to be able to use it to be an ally for change and to be in a position to even help develop tangible solutions to advance gender equity.
Yes, and sport really does offer that unique blend, right? I think it is probably one of the most productive contexts for us to be discussing equity, because it is so, the power gender dynamic is so entrenched in this realm for sure. So it'll be juicy. Thank you. And Tricia.
Thanks, Jen, and it's great to be here with you. And having rode with you, and I always knew you'd be great because you were, when we knew each other, always very thoughtful and looked at things from different perspectives, and always something that I enjoyed about being around you and being your teammate. So thanks for having me, and it's great being here with everyone. So just personally, I can just say I was fortunate as a kid to see in my family, really through sport, how women and men are capable of the same things. My mom and dad were both athletes. My mom was on the Canadian basketball team, and I saw how proud my father was of her, and I saw how proud she was of him in his athletic pursuits. And they just treated each other as equal and with respect, and treated all of us kids, boys or girls, the same way. So I had this impression that I could just do anything I wanted. It didn't matter if you were a boy or girl, woman, man. And so in whatever we were doing in sport and school and leadership. So it was a really great start. And I know that that's not, as you got into the real world, you realized, well, what's going on here? It's not the same, everyone. But, you know, personally, sport just offered me so much, the friendship and the fun and the confidence. And really, when I meet those barriers, I question them, always question them, and butt my head against them and try and change them. But as everyone has said already, you know, you learn resilience and leadership training for sure, and an opportunity to be part of something that can really show the best of us, and really make a difference in the world. And I think part of that is hopefully making the world a better place through sport. And to Gabby's point, though, because it isn't accessible to everyone, a big part of that is making sport accessible and a safe and welcoming environment for everyone. So I've seen the power of sport in so many levels, so individually and then in communities, countries and the way the Olympic movement brings people together. So that's my personal experience and also why I believe in sport and why I fight for it.
Awesome, thank you. And that leads me directly. It was almost like we planned that, right? Slipping our 20s beforehand and setting it all up. Leads directly into this question of, if we think of in sport for a little while, if we just look around and it is shocking sometimes, especially if you've had a really positive experience, but to then come into the realm of sport more deeply or in a different role and be surprised by some of the challenges and barriers facing women in sport. And again, I think there's intersection with all kinds of diversities, differences of the human experience. But if we just focus on women for now, gender, what are some of why is that important to you? Why do you think that gender equity should exist in sport? Why should we fight hard for it? What does that mean for you? And what are you trying to do within the work that you're doing? Anybody like to start? Thinking.
I can start.
Okay, thanks.
It's so important because sport opens doors that nothing else, and it's the great equalizer. I remember at my international federation level, I still work with international rowing, and I was chair of the Women's Commission for a while, and we had a country come to us as part of our development program, say, we want to be part of your development program, and we said, great, and they said, we want to start a rowing program, great. And so we've got all our men lined up. I said, oh, sorry. Actually, our development program, our policy is that we support countries. They have to have men and women. So they did it. There's men and women. And 8 years later, we had the first rowers at the Olympic Games from that country, both men and women. And that's a door that wouldn't have been open if first of all, we hadn't had women at the top helping make those decisions, and policies in place that were made with women's input. So we had that insight in terms of what was important. And then just to see that opportunity on the ground so that women who wouldn't have had that door open to them opened, and then passing through and having that Olympic experience, which brings so much else in terms of your life, maybe an opportunity for an education maybe that you wouldn't have had before, or a job that you wouldn't have had before. So that's why it's important.
Yeah, and you speak to the policy and decision making and how these concrete processes can then lead to so much else, right? But starting with, you need to have that voice at the table first to influence the policy. Other people like to comment on it. Lorraine.
Yeah. So I'll use two words before I start, which is limitless potential. So the ability to have equity in sport for men and women creates the concept, the early stages of concept of limitless potential for everyone. If that is not the case for women as it is for men, it's the first barrier. It's the first negative, not the first, but the first truly societal negative commentary that a woman receives in from my experience. And so I don't know, I guess that's where I stop. About why.
Yeah. Because it's crucial if that's what we're seeing, right? That's what is being, I remember, and I've told the story in another situation where my daughter was about 13 and she opens up, and totally into sport, playing every sport she can. And she opens up the globe, like we got the globe. And she opens it up and says, to sports, because that's what she wants to look at. And then she just went and shut it and went, oh, just men's sports. And it was so cute because I thought, oh, I've never questioned it, because that was the message to me the whole time. But here she was like, slam, not reading that. It's just the same old deal. So it's cool. But it also speaks to the gravity of this, right? It can just shape someone's brain so deeply. Kate.
Yes, thank you. I guess kind of a continuation of what you just said about the Globe, and she notices just men. I recently read a Globe article recently published, and it mentioned that only 4% of televised sports are female or women's playing sports. And I thought that's ridiculously low. So it still needs a lot of work. And I know there's a neat organization based out of Boston that's trying to, the article mentions this organization, that's how I know, that's trying to double that number. So what's it called? The Fan Project is the project, the Fan Project in Boston. But to take it to a more personal level for me, what I think makes gender equity really important is that I think more female or women leaderships or leaders in those high roles in sport is important for longevity of women participating in sport. So I think that there's so few women that will try and have a family while participating in high performance sport. And I think also, even at not high performance sport, it's hard for mom when she's had a family to get back into sport, just based on the support structures that are around there to help her get back into the sport. I know personally, most of my high performance team were men, and that while they said that it would be probably just my recovery that would be impacting my ability to be high performance after, there's so much more than that. And I think having a woman, especially one that has been a mom before, to be able to have the realistic conversations and to better guide those women through the process of being pregnant and training, coming back, so that they're not getting sick and injured and they have appropriate programming. I think that having women in the leadership role would encourage other women to stay in their sport longer. And why that is important is because the longer in your sport, the more you know, usually those little secrets, you accumulate these little secrets of high performance. And I was so fortunate to have a year and a half of training beside Lindsay Jenner, who had been in rowing for 14 years. And the knowledge that I was able to get from this athlete that had been in high performance for so long was greater than any other part of was greater than any coach could give me. So I think if I hadn't had that opportunity, I wish she could have stayed on longer because I could have learned more. But if she hadn't decided to stay in as long as she did, then I wouldn't have had that opportunity. And you have so many women retiring at a pretty young age because they want to get on with their life. And if we just had more female role models and leaders to say, okay, no, you don't have to have one or the other, then I think we'd have even greater potential for women in sport.
Absolutely. And then those voices in the room at the table also reminding us of what to consider to allow for these unique challenges or opportunities or needs, right? Same in coaching. I'm sure Lorraine and Isabel will speak to that too, that it's not just about getting women into coaching. It's about changing the nature of coaching to allow for diverse needs. Yeah, Jenny, comments on that?
Thanks, Jen. I think that's just so appropriate coming from you, Kate. Being with us here, baby in tow, just showing with action that it can be done, that you can do it all. I think for me, it's important for me personally, because throughout whether it's participation or my career in sport, that whenever I saw gender equity initiatives or women and girls initiatives, women in leadership, that I so rarely saw myself in those. It was never signaled to me that women and girls who look like me are ever centered or considered in the design of these initiatives or in the development of these initiatives. And similarly, when conversations about diversity and inclusion or anti-racism comes up, again, very rarely saw people like me represented. So whenever I am given the opportunity to take on positions or platforms to speak about this, I take it on with a lot of personal conviction, because I want to ensure, and I'm very fortunate to be working for an organization like Canadian Women in Sport, where intersectionality and diversity and perspective is so valued, because only by engaging all women and girls can we truly achieve gender equity. And so that's why I think it's so important, this conversation with gender equity and, for example, anti-racism movement is being spoken about at the same time.
Yeah. It's all the same challenges, isn't it? That whole hierarchy and the dominance, and someone has to be subjugated. I mean, that's the issue. And how do we climb out of that? All right, Gabby, I can just see you rock and rolling. You want to go in here?
Yeah, agree with everything that's being said. And I think exactly to Jenny's point, I'm a huge fan of Canadian Women in Sport. Our organizations work very closely together. That intersectional approach, the gender plus approach, it really filtrates your whole organization and what you do, and hopefully starting to filtrate more of the sports system and culture. A lot of what's been said, to summarize it in my mind, is that idea of you can't be what you can't see. That representation at all levels of sport really goes a long way. And, you know, we can start with gender, but again, gender plus, looking at women of color, women with disabilities, it's huge. And, you know, I think for us, it allows for social belonging, really, because if a girl can see herself, someone who looks like her, someone who is like her, similarities, that makes a huge difference. And, you know, at Fast and Female, what we look at is the heart of our organization is our role models, is these incredible women from across the country that have some kind of experience with sport. And we use the acronym REAL, Relatable, Empowering, Active Leaders, because role models there's just not one kind. And I think that's so important as well to acknowledge, like, look at everyone on this call, like all these incredible women, like we're all role models in our own ways, and we have different sporting experiences and careers and roles and are living in different places in the country. But the fact that we're in these positions is huge, because there's so many girls, that younger girls growing up, that get to see us. And, you know, I think of myself, I never had a role model growing up that was not a cartoon character, and I never had a coach that was a woman. And again, I think, you know, growing up, the daughter of immigrant parents, sport wasn't something that was often watched in my household. They were still trying to navigate the Canadian system, learning the language. So I always said my role model was my dad. And as I grew up, I got to be exposed to all these incredible women that are athletes, that are CEOs, that are coaches. And I think to myself, wow, if I had had that when I was growing up, how different would my sport experience have been? And it's interesting because it's so different from my sister now, who's 8 years younger than me. And I went through the system first. I kind of navigated what it needed to be like, or what it should be like. I coach her now, and I've had the opportunity to see her coached by other women. And that's huge for gender equity, is to be able to see a place for yourself, to see people like you. And it's great to be the first. Like, I think Trailblazers, the first, you know, Kayla Gray, the first Black woman to host a sports, you know, show and network with TSN, like that's great. But what's even better is to be able to be the second and the third, and to know that then you become part of the norm, and it's not this groundbreaking thing. Let's break these glass ceilings, but then let's continue to make it the norm, so that when we open the Globe and Mail and we see women in, you know, in the media, we're not just like, yes, finally. We're like, oh, amazing. Look at the game last night. Like, did you see this? To make it part of the conversation, that's what's going to really support gender equity and create a new sports system and culture for girls and women.
Normalize, so crucial. And Tricia?
We used to always say sport builds strong, healthy communities, but I think it should be accessible, diverse sport builds stronger, healthier communities. I think that's where we have to get to, because the opportunities are there to be the best version of yourselves, but it can't be limited to a small group of people. So that's, I think, accessibility and diversity is just so important.
Yeah, adding those adjectives. And these are these intentional things we can do, right? To be more explicit. This kind of sport will build strong individuals and communities. And I think that's another issue we face in sport, where there's this assumption, sport's good, sport teaches. No, it doesn't. Not without great coaching, great leadership, great policy, great, you know, inclusivity and open doors and norms. Lorraine, comment.
Yeah, just continuing on that thought, Jen, you know, there was research quite some time ago about immigration and how the first connection to community actually happens through sport recreation within their community. It just doesn't happen necessarily within the sanctioned sports system, and that's what we've got to fix. So community centers, places of worship, all of those we need to become allies and partners and resolve the barriers that we put up, which leads a person to opt not to go to the rowing club, but go to the community center. And so we really need to puzzle around that question, because as everyone is talking about the sense of community and well-being, that's still part of their experience, but not necessarily through the club system.
Right on. And what's working out there? I know when you mentioned immigration, Carolyn Trono, another good buddy of Tricia's and I, who rowed with the Canadian team for years, she works with Sport for Life, you know her, and that's kind of her pet, that's her baby now, right? She really wants to use sport as a way for welcoming new Canadians into the community, and it's beautiful, but very intentionally constructed and not always a natural flow out of the activities of the community. What else is working? What are we seeing that's really working concretely? Tricia mentioned policy, getting people at the table. What else are you seeing, Lorraine?
Yeah, obviously in the sphere of coaching, you know, we know the evolution of mentorship is the critical successful ingredient, where it also brings on what we would term sponsorship. So the opportunity not just to give a person a mentor, but also to give that mentee the ability to be seen in positions of power, to lead complex projects from the front, not from behind, from the front. And I think a lot of times, you know, we have to really reshape our thinking as women to make sure we put ourselves in the front, you know, and I think that's a really critical component to it. So apprenticeships and mentorships, they do work, but they only work when they're combined with opportunities to be out front. And you know, I think those are critical pieces. I think the virtual world, you know, Jenny was talking a little bit about that virtual world, but we have this incredible tool in front of us that we are taking more advantage of in creating sense of community and network. And I just predict it's going to be a big part of the future of sense of community for women coaches, because if you think about the data in terms of just universities and the percentage of female coaches or directors, athletic directors, which is really low, well, you need to create that sense of community around that female coach who goes into it. And that's why they deselect in the first place, because they're the only female in a group. Well, the pandemic has taught us that we can create a sense of community in a network of female coaches, for instance, who may work in a male-dominated environment, to give them the support that they need to carry on with their career. And I just think it's a fascinating potential.
It is wonderful to see. We've been doing online learning for so long, but it was a battle to try to convince people to, you know, go use Teams or use these technologies. But now I love it. I love everybody's been it's been inculcated, right? So I love it. Kate, go ahead.
Building on Lorraine, the power of what social media can do, I think, is going to be so important for gender equity. I really, really love Alicia Montano. I don't know if you know her. She's a runner from the United States, and she, bringing it back to being a mom, because that's what I know, she has kind of spurred on the Dream Maternity movement and the And Mother movement, which is making it so that you can believe and have resources to be able to have a career, not just in sport, but a career, whether it's sport or outside sport, and motherhood. And her voice kind of sparked the big debate about sponsorship with Nike and other big organizations, and how a lot of women, when they get pregnant, they lose their sponsorship. And then that created a huge rewriting of all that sponsorship stuff, that a lot of companies jumped on the bandwagon and said, okay, no, we'll rewrite our contracts and make it so that you're not going to lose your funding. And then also give them, instead of saying you have to do X number of competitions by this time after you're pregnant, which can be really way too early for a lot of women, the ability to ease back into sport. And so I think social media with big players like that are just, it's huge to create new opportunities and gender equity for women.
And it really does start with that linking of arms, doesn't it? Creating a bit of a community so you have more courage or more support or more feeling like you're not alone. There are other people like-minded, and then working to challenge. You really do have to challenge the system. I was just reading about the wrestler, right, who had gone off on that leave, and the policy used to be, again, thoughtlessly, right, equated maternity leave was equated with an injury leave. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. And that what that communicates to people, right, is unbelievable. All right, so but challenging that, changing that was crucial, and now we're in a new world, and we have to keep the momentum. Jenny, go ahead.
Yeah, adding to what you were saying about policy and that, and I think one of the really great things we're seeing, especially recently, is sort of a shift of responsibility of achieving gender equity, shifting from women and girls to the leaders of the organizations or the key players in the system. I think so often when we think about women and girls or lack of participation, lack of leadership, we say, well, we need to train the women. The women need to get to a point where they can take on those positions. But we're really starting to see, and I think this is where the gender equity and the safe sport funding from Sport Canada has been just such a huge driver for change, because it's really given the onus to sports organizations to say you shape the culture of your sport, and it is your responsibility to create an environment that is conducive to gender equity, that is appealing, that women go on maternity leave and they want to come back. And so like what you've already said, Jen, looking at, and Lorraine, you know, it's yes, mentorship, it's representation, it's media, but it's also the less sort of sexy topics like HR and data and policies, looking at what you have written, but then where the gaps are, where the unwritten rules are, where unconscious bias and traditions and nepotism can come into play. And some of, again, funded by Sport Canada, our gender equity playbook really is working with national sports organization to really take a robust and honest look at all aspects of the organization, whether it's governance, leadership, HR, outreach efforts, with a gender lens to try and get to the bottom of it. And I think witnessing leaders of organizations, their willingness to participate in this process in the middle of a pandemic, as if there's not enough problems already to think about, but really to pick apart what other issues there are, has really given us a lot of hope, you know, to see that, okay, yeah, this is a time, we're making change, let's make more changes. And we're really seeing that, okay, yeah, maybe we can make this happen.
Well, that's the beauty of a crisis, right? It really reveals what's most important. And so it is, we're perfectly poised for this change. Tricia, go ahead.
Oh, a couple of things. There's lots of great points to pick up from here. One of the things that I found really, really helpful was really to learn the history of why things are the way they are right now. So and that helps you address the, oh, it's tradition, Tricia, or this is the way we've always done it, Tricia. If you know the history of we did it in the International Rowing Federation, for example. We had a Canadian, Amanda Schweinbenz. She was doing her PhD thesis, and she did one on the history of women in rowing. So we learned, for example, we knew that women weren't invited to the Olympic Games until 80 years after the men were. And so they were invited finally in 1976, but the coaches and the leaders weren't, because the federation was already set up and it was working fine with great leaders, you know, well-meaning volunteers who all just happened to be men. And so, you know, understanding that, and so the women leaders just sort of went off, and because the price of admission was really, well, you join our organization. So understanding that, then you can start to chip away at those barriers to women. The other thing I wanted to say was I've seen a huge shift internationally in terms of equity and more women in leadership in sport, because the leaders have taken it on women and men, because it's not a women's issue, it's a human issue. And so I've seen a huge change, and part of that from the president of the IOC, who's a huge advocate for strength and diversity, and that includes obviously men and women. And so I think leadership from the top is critical. Knowing your history, knowing your data so you can address things. Oh, there's just no women here, and well, here are all the women, you know, so you have the data. And then the leadership from the top, and leadership that across the board, it's not just a women's issue. You don't know, I don't know if you've all been on boards where a women's issue came up and they all looked at you because you were the only woman on the board, and said, well, you know, this is our issue, guys. Come on. So I've seen a shift though.
Good. Yes, and I was going to mention Safe Sport too. I really noticed that as well, that it's exposed, you know, that it's not just a coach that's problematic. It's all the people that enable it to happen, and the culture surrounding and society and their upbringing. It's everything, right? We're all responsible. We all need to wake up and step up. Excellent. And the good reasons that Tricia raises, you know, I love that point. What are the good reasons for these old ways or, you know, traditional ways? And there always are good reasons, and understanding that will help us to then change it, to expand our thinking. All right, so that's leading us into thinking about, I think, what we learn in sport as well. So there are good reasons for pushing for diversity in sport, for gender equity, but for inclusion more generally as well. We've talked lots about the power of diversity. I hear it in everything everybody's saying, but can we be more explicit about that? Why is it important to have the balance, the diversity, the inclusion, the complete difference and complete representation? Why is it so important? Just before we move into the next question, what do you think? I think we take it for granted, but we don't talk about it enough.
I can start. I think, you know, the problem is when you don't think of diversity, you think of sameness. And so you approach girls and women as homogenous groups. You think of them as one of the same. You don't take an intersectional lens, and that can be really detrimental, because then you don't consider things like age, race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status. And so you kind of take it through almost like an equality approach. You think that everyone has the same starting line. So if I just put this program out there, you should have access to it, because by me just existing, that's more than enough. And I will say something, maybe that's the start. Like, I think sometimes programs don't exist. So when you exist, it's the first step. But if you don't look at diversity, if you don't take an intersectional approach, you will fail a lot of people. We are not all the same. Like, looking at, and you know, to Tricia's point, like when it's a woman's problem, you shouldn't just look at the one person in the room that you think this problem is relevant to. Well, no, it impacts everyone. And I think the truth is, when it impacts girls and women, it could impact siblings, parents. Obviously, it impacts them, but it impacts this future as well. And you know, things like cost and access and the type of location that you have and how you run your programs and how you advertise them, it does set you up for failure, because then you're not aware of who your targeted demographic is. You're making these assumptions. You know what happens when you make assumptions. I won't say the little quote there, but I just think it speaks to so much. If you take a second and you pause and you think, okay, you know, I think there's incredible resources that look at girls and women, and I think those are a good first step. And I mean, Jenny, I have all your reports from Canadian Women in Sport on my desk right now. I refer to them ongoing. Every time a new report comes out, I get excited, and they're a great first step, but they provide you with a framework. And that's the idea, is you have to take the framework and like the template, and then look at your situation, look at your demographic. Be like, okay, this is what we know so far, but how might this be different with the community that I'm looking to work with? Because I guarantee you all our communities are very different, regardless of if we're from the same city. Like, I could be in Scarborough, you could be in Regent Park or Malvern. There's gonna be little things that are different that you need to be aware of. And if you don't consider diversity and you don't consider intersectionality, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail as a whole, or to fail the people that are around you.
Yeah. And it's not sustainable, right? If it's all homogenous, you're only serving one aspect, or it's just very homogenous. There's just this sort of one way, and we know the only way to thrive is through diversity and responding to all. We used to use a metaphor of a rope for our crew of 4, and we had an 8 as well. But because it was intertwined and aligned, but it depended, the strength of a rope depends on the multiple threads, the multiple fibers, right? It also means that if someone was injured, then you could remove one and the whole rope doesn't fail necessarily. So you're not relying on those links, you know? But I love that concept. It really hinges on the diversity of the strands involved in the rope or the cable or whatever you're using. Beautiful. Lorraine.
Yeah, I just really wanted to build on Gabby's great comments there. You know, that quote of, when you're the only one, you represent everyone. Well, how can you represent everyone when you think of diversity and intersectionality? So you bear a burden that you cannot achieve. And, you know, in terms of the men around the table, they don't bear that burden because of the multitude and their dimensions and their lived experiences and what they bring to the table. And so until there's that parity, it changes the dynamic in the conversation, and with that diversity creates a better product. You know, we all know diversity creates a better product. So it's kind of a fascinating space for us to be in to try to change.
Right. So if it continues to be this imbalance, it'll just perpetuate by the very nature of the imbalance, right? They just look around. This is the norm. This is who's around the table all the time. Yeah. And like I did, opening and only expecting to see the men's sports, you know, whereas my daughter expects something else. Excellent. Jenny.
We used to say this this thing where we say ROI, return on investment, but flipping it and thinking about return on ignored. So who have you ignored in this conversation? Who have you left off your consideration? And what is the consequence of you leaving these people off the table? When it comes to gender equity, it's more than half of the population. And so I think we can look to a lot of other sectors that have a lot of parallels to the sports sector to see, okay, this isn't just a social justice issue. It's also about sustaining the sport industry as a thriving industry. It's also, if we look at the trajectory of population change in Canada and New Zealand, we're seeing that the diversity is going to grow. And so how can we as a sports system continue to be a thriving industry, continue to be such a driving force in the culture? We must consider the needs of all of these people, and looking at, you know, research and studies from other sectors, we know that if you care about gender equity, if you have gender equitable boards and teams and leadership, that you perform better financially, that you perform better against measures in your strategy. And so I think it's really important for us as a sector to start to build that sort of business case of how does gender equity and diversity impact your people? How does it impact your brand? How does it impact your customer? And then sort of start to think about it from that aspect, to bolster our we know why it's important to think about gender equity from a social justice point of view, but what does it look like from a business point of view as well?
Love it. Thank you. And we have to, right? Always think of all of those elements. Love it. Tricia, you had your mic on. You ready to go? Or
if we were in the same room, I would have just said, I know how many times I was around the table in the early days too, when there weren't a lot of women, and you bring something up and people say, oh, I never thought of it that way. You know, I mean, and that's exactly the point. and to Lorraine's point, it couldn't just be one woman representing all women from all walks of life, from all diversity. So, you know, a couple times I remember some proposition going forward and you'd go, oh, wait a minute. Would that be the same for women? Oh, I hadn't thought about it, you know, and it wasn't trying to keep women down, or it was just, I hadn't crossed my mind, you know? So that's why it's so important to have diverse voices there at the table.
yeah, it's almost like a careless or thoughtless, or just, you know, we're just accustomed to it, but it's perpetuating the yeah, wake up. We all just have to wake each other up a little more. And that's what I'm loving about the work around unconscious bias, right? And there are some really wonderful practices, even around our Rowing Canada board. We're acknowledging the land we're on, and then we're acknowledging, just to kind of wake ourselves up to the fact we all have unconscious bias, and try to be a little more intentional before something falls out of our mouths for everybody around the table. Excellent. How about through sport? So in sport, there are challenges in terms of equity, we know. And there are lots of great movements, strategies. We've talked about mentorship, sponsorship, alliances are forming, the support, the communities of practice so people can get the momentum to make change. We're challenging status quo. We're learning about the status quo and trying to understand it better so that we can shift with respect. They're wonderful. We're paying attention to these big movements that are changing things, like we see with Safe Sport, where it's forcing people to take responsibility more broadly. Lots of great stuff is happening, thinking about all aspects of society, financial, economic, but also the human and the social. Through sport now, what can sport do? What are we seeing happening? You know, I'm thinking of Megan Rapinoe and the way she's using her platform to the team itself fighting for, you know, so they're galvanizing, and some people reject that it's not my business as an athlete to be doing these kind of social change efforts, but more and more people are stepping up, right? We're seeing them take their platform to new heights. Comments about that? What do you think sport could be doing as an entity, as a discipline, I guess, I don't know what to call it really, to move to advance equity? And what's working? Kate, go ahead.
So maybe this is a silly one, I don't know. But I think really challenging, like kind of throwing in the face of people, challenging their beliefs of what women should be doing. So for instance, with Sarah Fuller at Vanderbilt, being a kicker for a men's football team, the comments that she received, I think, was a huge eye-opener for a lot of people about why can a woman not participate if she has a skill set that's required in that team? Why can she not participate on a men's team? And so that then sparks so many conversations and is an eye-opener, I think, like really highlights that, wow, we are kind of still very backwards. And yeah, it's just sparking conversations through just action in their playing their sport, I think is a big thing.
Yeah. And I mean, she really took a risk, didn't she, to go for it? Because it could have gone badly, but it didn't. Right? And but that's a risk, and I'm so grateful to her for doing that. But you're right? Opens our eyes, wakes us all up, makes us talk about things differently.
Yeah, and what is the role of women in our society, I guess? It kind of highlights that a little bit, that you see people still not thinking that their role can be equal to a man's.
Of course. Yeah. Tricia, go ahead, comment.
Yeah, and social media is just playing a huge role in that, especially now, right? Sports something that people pay attention to, and it's powerful, it's dynamic, you can see women and men pushing the boundaries of what's humanly possible, you know, the best of who we can be. And I mean, there's the negative to sport too, I get that. But, you know, to your point, Jen, and someone else, was it Kate who said, you know, less than 4%, less than 5% of the media coverage is on women. So what a huge opportunity. Okay, so we're going to try and get to 10%. Well, 10% means 90% still, right? 90, 10. So, you know, I think we have an opportunity there, and just think of the difference that would make. And, you know, I come back to Canada from the international work I do, and I'm always just feel so fortunate to have been born here, to have opportunities. And we still have opportunities differently than a lot of other countries around the world, but what a difference it would make in other countries as well. So I think that's a huge opportunity that we should be promoting. And I know that there are a number of initiatives. I know Angela Ruggiero, I think that might be the one you alluded to. And, you know, I think that's something that we should jump onto.
Love it, love it. And so giving people the channels to communicate, right, as well, or making these more accessible has opened up the world so much more beautifully as well, and just opened our eyes to see so many other things. Gabby.
Yeah, I think it's something funny to just be able to acknowledge how political sport is. And there's a lot of people that don't want to acknowledge that they're like, you know, sport isn't political. It's just this thing you do, but we see how political it is working in the system, being athletes and administrators. And, you know, I think to Kate's point, talking about Sarah Fuller and then looking at, you know, the NBA, the WNBA, the PWHPA, like all these different organizations and professional sport leagues that have used sport as a vehicle, as a tool to speak out about other things, injustices, equity in pay for in terms of gender. Like these are things that happen outside of sport and in sport. And so if you use sport, which kind of to some of the points earlier, like people love to pay attention to sport. So if you're able to use your platform, why wouldn't you? And it's funny to think, you know, I think of LeBron James and being told to shut up and dribble. And there's so many things that women have been told to shut up and do that are based off of gender stereotypes. But why, if we have like, you know, why not use your platform to speak out? And I think that's the beauty of sport, is that you can do it in so many ways. Maybe you're not the person to take the mic and stand up front, but even just existing in sport as women and as administrators, that itself can be very political. That itself can make a statement because it's something that didn't happen beforehand. And so we ourselves are kind of living political figures in what we do.
Yeah. And sport has the power, right, to be has the potential to be such a powerful vehicle and such a beautiful metaphor. It represents and has the potential again to represent so many beautiful human qualities and capacities. So it is a natural platform to teach. I mean, I think it's a degree, right? When you go through sport, you're learning so much more than you do could in other realms. Lorraine.
Yeah, Jennifer, I can't help but bring up the impact of safe sport and the ability for the voices to be heard, to change not only sport, but to change communities and the way we talk about abuse, and contributing to that, one of many voices, but an important voice, and how these champions have stepped up in ways that are enormous for future generations of participants and athletes and coaches, and normalizing a conversation that was not normalized for so many years. And I have seen it internationally change the voice, and I've seen the conversation be paired with gender equity, to have more women, to have more conversation about sports safety. And so I just look at that as one of the most tangible examples of change through sport.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. And we do always end up coming to that. It ends up emerging as a concept because really it is about that respect, being kind to one another, not demeaning. You can be demanding, you can strive together, but it's bringing out the best of sport. Been interesting. A colleague of mine said that safe sports creating a culture of fear. And I think feminism did the same, right? Where people start feeling very uncomfortable and like they have to be too careful and watch everything they say and be politically correct. And yet my daughter said, no, just be respectful, just be funny, be actually funny instead of rudely, funny. So I do think it's just calling on us to do so much. And sport is such a beautiful metaphor and blueprint, right? Microcosm. It has the biggest reach too. I mean, that's what probably more people in the world are involved or watching sport than any other pursuit. So why not leverage it? Jenny, go ahead.
I just think that's so important to build on what Lorraine is saying, that safe sport conversation for gender equity, because in many ways, creating a safe environment is the foundation to creating an inclusive environment. And then a culture can't be inclusive if it's not safe and people don't feel respected to begin with. And I think like what you've just said, Jen, that sport is a microcosm of society, and through it is these things that we talk about through sport, like consent. I mean, such an important conversation that we sort of just trust parents or trust, people to learn about it along the way. But because we are starting to see so much of the safe sport conversation being normalized, that people can talk to their kids about consent. People can talk about the athletes that they coach about consent, which is such an important conversation. What we're seeing as well is there's a lot of talk going on about trans inclusion in sport. And to what everyone has said, you know, there's that Nelson Mandela quote of sport has the power to unite like little else does, but sport also has the power to divide. You know, we can see that in a lot of ways. And we see that come out a little bit when there's tough conversations like this happening, where we start to see, okay, this gender equity movement is starting to, you know, they're starting to have different voices amongst ourselves, especially when it comes to topics like trans inclusion in sport. And so I think that there's not an answer to it, but more so that the world is watching, right? The world is watching what we're doing as a sports sector, and we have to take on somewhat of a responsibility of being a leader in that space.
Absolutely. And because media is so prevalent, people are so much more comfortable in this, using technology, using social, being participants, right? Social participants, citizens love it. I remember a thing I saw, you know, a meme going around about Sue Bird and LeBron and comparing the two and how much they made, how much they'd earned, how many champs they had won. So it was going around for a while. But I love Sue Bird's response to that, because of course she was making 300 grand and he was making 300 million, and the disparity was enormous. And yet they had exactly the same accomplishments. And Sue Bird being a basketball player for WNBA, and LeBron James being the same in the NBA. But she made the point that, well, what we're really fighting for is media coverage, because once we have that 50%, 90%, you know, we have leveraged that opportunity. Look out, we'll be making 300 million as well. Not that I necessarily agree with all that either, but you know, I just thought, whoa, so smart. Focusing in on your actual lever point, right? Instead of just kind of being upset about the disparity. All right, through sport, what else could sport do? Why is sport such a force for social change? What makes it so effective? We've talked about it being a metaphor, a microcosm. It has access to so many eyes and ears. It has powerful leaders embedded within it. Look at all of you. Yeah. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Yeah, that's a heavy question. I just feel sport contributes to healthy conflict resolution fundamentally, which is so lacking with social media, because there is no, you know, healthy conflict resolution. It's these statements of utter dismay that create utter dismay. But I don't know that we learn that anywhere else. Like I know in a sense, you know, your parents, it's a hierarchical power position. With your teachers, it's a hierarchical power position, even with your coach. But as a player with other participants, it's one of the great leveling experiences in dealing with adversity and conflict. And if I think back to that skill set, you know, I'd be hard pressed to figure out a better place that I learned that, you know. And I'm just going to add very humorously, I'm the youngest of 7. So if you want to talk conflict, let's talk conflict with one bathroom.
I relate, absolutely. Youngest as well. Yes, right? It is a forum where we can learn these things, and it's sort of, you're forced to learn this stuff because you're put in these into the structure of the process, challenged to do so. You know, our coach learned and then taught us to balance power. I think that was the first real, really key learning I took from sport, was that the way to balance power is to put the principle at the center, the purpose at the center, the goal, not a gold medal, but a standard of, you know, a speed or something like that. We are striving together to achieve. He was helping us. We are working toward it. We were relying on our opponents to achieve it as well, right? Because if they weren't there pushing, we weren't going to go as hard. So it was this very eye-opening experience to realize, oh, we're all working toward excellence, if you want to call it that. And he's a partner in it. He's not our supervisors, not pressing us down in some way. Yeah, it was really great learning, and I feel like I've carried it frustratingly into every other context, because people want those hierarchies of power over. Okay, I think if you haven't experienced sport, it's tough to get it. Go ahead, Tricia. And then I'm going to go to questions in the chat here.
Yeah, it's there is this sort of this structure of sport, but as you said, Jen, it is based on value. The sport has these values. And so if I think about my experience, so I'm this white girl that is growing up in Canada, and I have these opportunities because the structures that I joined were built by people who look like me, right? But then you get to a point where you look around and go, where's everybody else? Because that's not our community in Canada, right? So, but again, you go back to the principles and the values that are in sport, and that allows sport to evolve in a way to be more inclusive and to look at diversity and the values of that and so on. So I think that's something that I've learned through sport is, and as you say, it's the values part. It's not, I didn't join sport because I wanted that structure to stay the same for forever and ever, because that's tradition and that's what I like. I joined sport because of its values, and that's what I fight for in sport. And that means evolution and making sure that we do develop and become more inclusive. And, you know, it's not just where you happen to be born and how lucky, you know, maybe your parents were athletes. You just can't rely on that to really have a strong sports system in our country, and a sports system that it reflects our community. And that's something I think that we can evolve to, because it's about values.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm just going to go, because my head's just exploding, but I'm going to go to the chat, because we have a lot of people in the room with us here, and they are chomping at the bit to ask things and say things. So I want to draw everybody's attention to the chat here, where people are sharing resources, and I want to highlight that we as a team will also link to things like the playbook that Jenny mentioned. You know, things have come up that the different organizations are getting behind and promoting. And sorry, dog barking in the background. And so articles and resources. And then I'm also seeing questions about normalizing. And we were having a bit of a discussion about the norms, right? And how to shift those norms, wake people up, challenge those. And one thing we can pay attention to is language, right? For some reason, and Tricia and I have talked about this, you know, there's the 8, and then there's the women's 8, you know, or there's rugby, and then there's rugby. I know. I'm just gonna mute. Okay, there. And so female sportscaster, female high performance director. Why? Why do we add a woman in front? Women's NBA, you know, does it help to get rid of that? In rugby, they have gotten rid of it. So it's the World Cup. I once joked with my husband, I'm going to go watch rugby. And he goes, women's rugby? I'm like, or the rugby. You know, you got to catch yourself, but it's about being more intentional. So great point there from Megan. Andrea is mentioning ROI and has a question here. I do wonder how we are learning about those who are ignored or excluded. And that is something we find ourselves in, right? Everybody's asking that question finally. So how do we learn? Not just jump to conclusions or make assumptions about how we become more inclusive, but try to understand who we're serving. So to Gabby's point earlier, safe sport has started to shine a light on some of these reasons. But one extreme we have to get to hear through safe sport complaints. We need to find more productive mechanisms to hear the voices and concerns so we can build them into solutions. Yeah, so something all of us can carry. And there's 100 people on this call. So we all have a lot of power to start embedding these mechanisms to invite, to reach out, you know, build those bridges I'm talking about. Starts with minding the gap. Who are we actually trying to understand?
I wonder if I can
Go ahead.
Sorry, I wonder if I could just quickly speak to Andrea's comment, and I think that's so important. And part of our playbook that we talk about is we say, do you conduct exit interviews, and not just in the traditional HR sense of speak to an HR consultant, but speak to athletes that have left the sport or coaches that were coaching but then dropped off at some point, and then collecting gender and race and other identity dimensions during those interviews, because we recognize that, yeah, when people leave your sport or organization, they're honest. They tell you exactly, there's nothing to lose. There's no power positions at play. And so that is often something, and even in data collection, that isn't considered. We always look at, okay, who's in our sport? Let's look at data. Let's consult with the people that are in our sport and our organization. But what about the people who could potentially be in your sport and your organization that currently aren't? How are you reaching those? And then so through our assessment, we try and sort of explore different ways that can happen. But that's a really great point, is we need to pay more attention to the people who aren't in the sport or aren't within our reach, and find out why.
Go ahead, Kate.
I think, Jenny, you make such a good point. I know a lot of organizations will spend tons of money on getting a consultant to come in to say, okay, how can we improve a process? What's going on in the environment? How can we make it better? And just ask your previous athletes. They will be able to give you, you're right, like such an honest insight into what your environment is like and what would have been beneficial for them to have in place, and save yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars or however much it costs. But I think, unfortunately, there is so much fear for NSOs, I'll speak about NSOs, to speak up about these things and to speak to other, or maybe to athletes, because it's not awesome press. It's not going to help bring them any funding dollars or anything like that. It's scary subject matter. But I think it is such a lost opportunity to not speak to the previous athletes, because they really know what they needed to succeed in the sport, as opposed to having somebody who maybe never participated in sport but might have education on what can make a good environment step in. Yeah, that's a great point, Jenny.
So to be brave, be authentic. It actually ends up demonstrating a professionalism and openness and credibility, okay, when we ask the hard questions. Gabby.
There's an incredible organization called the Black Girls Hockey Club, if anyone hasn't heard of them. And they have this pledge. It's #Get Uncomfortable. And I think it kind of speaks to what Kate's saying and Andrew's question, and what Jenny has said, is that, you have to be able to get uncomfortable. Like, these are uncomfortable topics. And the Black Girls Hockey Club is looking specifically at racism and discrimination on race and ethnicity, but being able to get uncomfortable, ask these questions. I think the big thing too, Jen, kind of to what you had mentioned earlier about like not making assumptions, the best thing to do is, and I wanted to say this earlier too, is to work together, collaborate with organizations that are representative of some of these groups that maybe you haven't targeted in some of your programming originally, to work with them. I think that's a huge thing. And I was thinking about Safe Sport and Dr. Gresham Kerr at the University of Toronto. She's now the first woman dean at U of T in our Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education, which is like incredible. I'm fortunate to be a student there right now. And we also have a woman leading our like sport and recreation, Beth Alif, again, first woman in these two roles. And Dr. Kerr is, I believe she's doing research right now, exactly looking at Safe Sport and those that have exited Safe Sport. And I think that's where it's also good to collaborate and work, not just with other organizations, but researchers as well, because it does allow you to work with academics and kind of take a step back to work together on the question, but have them look at theory, look at the right questions to ask, because sometimes when you ask the questions, it might get a little too sensitive, and there might be individuals who aren't willing to answer it to you because maybe they are still worried. But being able to work together on these issues, it's a big thing, and it allows you to do it right the first time, if that makes sense, or just put more intention into what you're doing.
Excellent point. Thank you, Gabby. And Lorraine.
Yeah, I just continuing along that vein, that notion of nothing about us without us, and we just recently started a pretty strong partnership with the Black Canadian Coaches Association, and it's been phenomenal. The ability to have rich, deep, meaningful impact with an ally who has created a sense of community that wants to come to the table to address it is just, it's been overwhelmingly, it's just been so rewarding. I can't begin to tell you. And I will also tell you, we've seen some pretty hurtful and hateful reactions to that. And so part of the conversation is about courage. And, you know, there's this kind of reaction to try to knock you off your kilter, if that's an okay descriptor, you know, when the Black Canadian Coaches Association has come into being, and it's been, we've had a lot of internal conversation about courage, direction, commitment, and curiosity, you know, not just like for all the voices that we're hearing and why we're hearing them, because I think that's so important. The other thing we've done and we're continuing to do is we will not work with an agency or an organization in the EDI space unless they are from those lived experiences. So we've made a fundamental shift, whereas we hadn't in the past. And that's been very helpful and very meaningful. And, you know, the last thing I'll just say is we really need to get out of our sports structure and hold out our hand to community centers and friendship centers and, you know, other places to bring people and meet them halfway. It's not about bringing people into ours. It's actually about creating a greater pie, you know?
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Love these. They're very hopeful messages. And there's always this tinge, which is important to acknowledge, right? There are the barriers, the challenges, the ugliness, the pushback, the tipping you off your kilter. Yeah. And when you think about what we're trying to shift from this very hegemonic kind of, you know, colonial, it's very traditional, it's very hierarchical, it's very solid, right? And so to threaten that and chip away at the base of it and try to reform it is threatening to a lot of people. So just to be aware of that and stay strong, linked up, be courageous through our support of one another. Crucial, but also to understand, back to Tricia's point about good reasons. You think about a pyramid, it's very solid and strong, and it's all about stability and security. So how do we provide a promise of that same sort of security in collaboration, in understanding, in shared purpose? Yeah, that's our job too, hey? Communicate it that way instead of just antagonism. Other comments about the future for sport? Questions from the whole room, please just post those in the chat and I'll be sure to have a look, keep my eye on those. Some people are having to head out, but this will be posted, of course. Yeah, sport is not just a reflection of broader social life. It is indeed a place where the struggle for social justice can help foster broader change beyond the sport arena. Beautifully said. And we'll keep this chat too. There's a lot of great stuff in here and comments that people have made. Yeah, other comments. Tricia, where do you see the future?
Well, just that there's some opportunities coming up. So we have at the Canadian Olympic Committee, we have the Women Emerging Leadership Development Programs, WELD. So, and it's been great. And it's women who are working in an NSO and it's a supporting mentorship kind of program, but we've expanded it to be BIPOC focused. So, you know, there are little things that you can do that are perhaps less scary for the overall scheme of things for some people. You know, you can take these steps and, you know, there's a big event that was postponed from last year, the conversation about women in sport, and that's in Quebec. So that's coming up this summer. And so the COC is going to sponsor 25 WELD leaders and mentors to go to that conference. And then through Game Plan, we have a coaching education grant to bring women into coaching. And then the coaching enhancement program includes a women in coaching initiative. So there's a lot of things that are within a structure that's already there that you can sort of start to tweak and think about, okay, why are we here? You know, again, going back to our core values and about respecting people and tweaking them to make sure that they're reflective of that.
Yeah, expanding, good. And sharing these resources, right? Linking up with each other. I often share the structure of a community of practice can be started by anybody, and all it is having that idea. You want to improve your practice around one area, reach out to a few people who have that shared desire to improve their practice, and there you are, you're now a linked up group, and then you will all have incredible impact beyond that. It's actually quite remarkable and doesn't take anybody giving you permission. You know, it's lovely. I've got a few young coaches doing that in my world right now. Other things that are happening in your world that you're proud of, you want to promote, you want to share, we can link to it, of course, but other initiatives that you're noticing? Anybody?
Just I put a link there to the Women in Coaching section, which has a lot of resources from mentorship models to grants to programs. We have a great program with youth sports and colleges in terms of placements and access for female coaches through a collaborative space. There's a lot in there. I won't go through it all. Just take a look through there. There's great research. There's a great journal on women in coaching. The data hasn't changed, sadly, in some instances, but you know, have a look there. And another piece that I'll maybe mention is we're doing training and development in gender-based violence for coaches in the detection, prevention, mitigation, and support needed. So I think that's a really important part of this conversation that maybe needs to have some time spent on it as we talk about safety and the notion of gender-based violence and what it looks like and how to prevent it. But just have a look there, and if there's anything else we can give for anyone, let me know. There's also some pretty good stuff on Safe Sport as well, and EDI.
Oh, it's amazing, Lorraine. I know you have a big team, but I am just in awe of the change you've been able to foster so quickly. It's incredible, and how many of these programs you're getting off the ground with intention and focus, commitment. It's beautiful. Thank you for that work, Jenny.
Yeah, just want to echo that and say so many organizations that we've worked with have coaching or gender equity and coaching at the top of their list of things that they want to change. And it's really helped with our conversation with them, with the CAC team having just such a vast range of skill sets, knowledge, resources that we've been able to direct them to. And a bit of a watch this space as we're working closely with the CAC team in a resource specific to coaching, which is, yeah, such an important conversation. I think one of the things that we see with gender equity is this sort of tendency to oversimplify inequity or gaps and you know, trying to boil it down to a simple concept or implementing sort of silver bullet solutions, when actually it is messy, it's complicated, and the more we know, the more we don't know, right? And so I think what we're really trying to do is to continue to evolve. You know, at Canadian Women in Sport, we're also on this journey of evolving the way we're thinking based on the conversations that are happening and trying to be a solutions partner. So not just sort of saying that gender equity is important, but really walking side by side with organizations to say, okay, this is an issue. How can we come up with the solutions together? How can we meet you where you are and help you move the needle just a little bit, and put one foot in front of the other? Alison always says, you know, it's a big issue, but how do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So we have to start somewhere. And so we have, and I'll share the links, I guess, with the correspondence that come out after, but we have resources for coaches, for clubs rather, if you're looking at implementing gender equity initiatives within your club. We have the Same Game tool that guides you through that. The Gender Equity Playbook I've spoken about, which involves the gender equity lens. And I think it's really important when we think about systems change, that involves individuals within that system all committing to applying a gender lens, a diversity lens in everything that we do. And so the gender lens, gender equity lens e-module is something that we've developed to help individuals within the sports system to start to think about gendered impacts to things that aren't essentially gendered by nature, and to look at applying that lens on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, looking forward to sharing more of those resources as we go.
Wonderful, thank you. And we will, we work always very hard after these webinars to source all of these things and link them up. The big thread for me right here is a thread that is linking all of us. I'm hearing partnerships amongst you all and across and beyond. And of course, we're inviting all our participants today to do the same, connect people up, you know, because I think that's what makes the fabric of all of this and much more sustainable and tenable and powerful. Awesome. Thank you so much for participating. Great work, everybody. I know you're all working so hard in so many different realms, but really in calling on people to put on those lenses, right, and think a little bit differently, make their ears a little bigger, think a little more intentionally, reach out to each other a little more often, and try to make this place a safe place. Because I love that point you made, Jenny, that it can't be inclusive, it's not safe. So it starts with being that respectful, kind, just like Bonnie Henry tells us to be, right? I'm loving that from the COVID crisis as well, these really crucial reminders. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks very much to all the participants for spending so much time with us. It really gives me a lot of faith when I see so many people taking part in a conversation like this, benefiting from the wisdom of these women who've joined us today and sharing your thoughts as well. Please stay in touch. And again, I think the strength of these movements is in their connection. So let's keep in touch and keep coming back for more information, more resources. We'll try and do our best to send out all the information across all our channels as well at Rural Roads. Thank you. Take care and have a wonderful week. Bye.